The world was a different place in the 1960s. It was a time of deep suspicion. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in what people called the Cold War. It wasn't a shooting war, not exactly, but it was a constant battle of minds. Both sides wanted to know what the other was doing. They wanted to know their secrets. This meant a lot of spying. Spying was everywhere. It happened in big cities and quiet towns. It happened across borders. It happened in the air and under the sea. Both countries had a lot of spies. These were people who worked undercover. They tried to get information. They bugged rooms. They photographed documents. They recruited people. But human spies were always risky. They could be caught. They could be turned. They could be killed. So intelligence agencies like the CIA in the US were always looking for new ways to spy. They needed methods that were safer. They needed methods that were less obvious. They needed ways to get information without putting people directly in harm's way. Imagine trying to plant a listening device in a highly secure building. A human agent would have to get inside. That's hard, and it's dangerous. A device left behind might be found. So, what if the device could move? What if it could go where people normally couldn't, or where they wouldn't be noticed? This was the kind of thinking that was going on. They were looking for something truly out of the box. They tried all sorts of things back then. Some ideas were smart, some were a bit strange, and some were just plain wild. The CIA was always pushing the boundaries. They explored all kinds of technologies. They looked into hidden cameras. They developed tiny microphones. They thought about ways to deliver messages secretly. But they also thought about using things that weren't technology at all, or at least not in the traditional sense. They considered nature. They considered animals. Animals move around freely. They often go unnoticed. They can get into places people can't. A dog might draw attention, a bird might not carry enough. But what about a common household pet? A creature that blends into the background. This period, the 1960s, was a time of big risks and intelligence. The stakes were incredibly high. Nuclear war was a real fear, so anything that could give an edge was worth trying. Even if it sounded a bit crazy, they needed to know if the Soviets were developing new weapons. They needed to know their plans, and the Soviets felt the same way about the US. This created an environment where unusual ideas were not just tolerated, but often encouraged. They wanted to explore every possibility, no matter how remote. They wanted to make sure they weren't missing a trick. They were under pressure to be innovative, and sometimes that innovation led them down some very unexpected paths, like thinking about using animals for very serious spy work. It showed a desperate need for new tools in a very dangerous game. This brings us to one of those truly unconventional ideas. An idea that sounds like something from a spy movie. It was a project that combined the animal kingdom with the latest spy tech. The goal was to create a living, breathing mobile listening device. A device that could walk right into a room, listen in on conversations, and walk right out again. All without anyone being the wiser. And the animal they chose for this ambitious task was the humble house cat. Operation Acoustic Kitty. That was the name of the project. It sounds like a joke now. But it was very serious. The idea was simple, at least on the surface. Take a cat, turn it into a spy. The CIA thought this was a brilliant plan. Cats are everywhere. People don't pay much attention to them. They can wander into buildings. They can get close to people without looking suspicious. They are small. They are agile. They can jump and climb. A cat could sit under a bench. It could nap near a window. It could even walk right past guards without a second glance. This made them seem like perfect spy candidates. So, the plan was to put a microphone inside a cat. Not just any microphone. A tiny one. One that could pick up voices. Then the cat would need a battery to power the microphone. And it would need a transmitter. The transmitter would send the sounds it picked up to a nearby listening post. This listening post would be operated by human agents. They would listen to what the cat heard. The whole setup had to be small, it had to be light, and it had to be hidden perfectly inside the cat. No wires showing, no bumps. The cat had to look like a normal cat. The CIA scientists and engineers started working on this. They got a cat. They began to figure out how to do it. Where would the microphone go? How would they hide the battery? How would they make sure the cat wasn't hurt or bothered by the equipment? These were big questions. The technology needed for this was cutting edge for the 1960s. Miniaturization was a big challenge. Making things small enough to fit inside a living animal was not easy. They didn't have the microchips we have today. Everything was much larger. They thought about putting the microphone in a cat's ear. That seemed like a good place. It would be close to the sounds, and it could be hidden. The battery was harder. Batteries were bigger then. They needed one that was powerful enough, but also tiny. And it couldn't interfere with the cat's movement. The transmitter also had to be small. And it needed an antenna. They had to figure out how to conceal all of this. It was a puzzle. A very complex puzzle involving biology and electronics. They began to perform surgeries. They tried different ways to place the equipment. They wanted to make sure the cat was comfortable, or at least as comfortable as possible. They didn't want the cat to be in pain. They also needed the cat to act naturally. A spy cat that limped or seemed unwell would draw attention. That would defeat the whole purpose. So the early development involved a lot of careful planning. It involved many experiments. They were trying to achieve something no one had ever done before. They were literally trying to create a cyborg cat. It sounded like something out of science fiction, but they were serious. They believed it could work. They had to try. The actual surgery was a major part of this project. It was not just about hiding parts. It was about making them work inside a living creature. First, they put a small microphone in the cat's ear canal. This was so it could pick up conversations clearly. They chose the ear because it was a natural place for sound collection. It was also relatively easy to conceal the microphone there, but it had to be very tiny. Then came the battery. This was a bigger problem. Batteries in the 1960s were not like the tiny, powerful ones we have today. They were much bulkier. They needed enough power to run the microphone and the transmitter for a decent amount of time. They tried to place the battery near the cat's rib cage. This was a place where it might be less noticeable. It also had to be placed carefully so it wouldn't hurt the cat or stop it from moving freely. The weight was also an issue. Even a small battery adds weight. Too much weight would change how the cat moved. It would make it seem unnatural. The transmitter was also a challenge. They placed it at the base of the cat's skull. This seemed like a good spot for sending signals. The antenna was woven into the cat's fur. This was an attempt to make it completely invisible. The entire setup, including all the wires, had to be internal. No wires could show. The cat had to look and act completely normal. The surgical team had to be very skilled. They were essentially operating on a live animal to implant electronic components. This was very difficult work, but the biggest hurdle was not the surgery itself. It was the cat. A cat is not a robot. You can't program it. It has its own mind. It has its own instincts. How do you get a cat to go to a specific location? How do you get it to sit still and listen? How do you make sure it doesn't just wander off or get distracted? This was the real problem. They tried training the cat. They used food. They tried to get it to go to certain places. They wanted it to sit near a target, maybe a park bench where spies were known to meet. But cats are independent. They get hungry. They get curious. They get scared. A cat might hear a noise and run away. It might see a bird and chase it. It might just decide it wants a nap in the sun. All these natural behaviors made the project almost impossible. The weight of the equipment, even though they tried to make it light, also caused problems. The cat might not walk quite right. It might not jump as easily. These subtle changes could be noticed by someone paying attention. And a spy needs to be completely unnoticed. The battery life was also very short. The tiny batteries could only power the devices for a limited time. This meant any mission would have to be very short. It just wasn't practical. They spent a lot of time and money trying to overcome these technical and behavioral hurdles. But the nature of a cat proved to be the most stubborn obstacle of all. After all the surgeries, all the planning, and all the training, the time came for a real test. The CIA needed to see if Operation Acoustic Kitty could actually work in the field. This was the moment of truth. They had spent a lot of money and effort on this project. They wanted to know if they had created a real spy cat. The setting for the test was a park. It was an outdoor area chosen to simulate a real-world spying scenario. The target was 2 men. They were sitting on a park bench. These men, there you have as a kid, because as a kid, you're looking around, you're going, oh, I wonder what's... They were supposed to talk about sensitive information. The idea was for the cat to walk near them, pick up their conversation, and transmit it back to the listening post. So they released the cat. It was supposed to walk across the park, approach the bench, and stay close enough to record the conversation. This was the big moment. Everyone involved in the project was watching. They were probably very anxious. They had put so much into this. But then it happened. The cat started to walk. It took a few steps. Then it got distracted. What distracted it? A taxi. A simple taxi. A cab pulled up nearby. And the cat, being a cat, probably heard a noise or saw something interesting. Maybe it just decided it didn't like the look of the park. So it didn't go towards the bench. Instead, the cat just wandered off. It started to cross the street. It moved away from the target. It moved away from the mission. And then a car hit the cat. Or so the story goes. The details are a bit fuzzy now, but the important thing is the cat's mission ended almost immediately. It didn't make it to the target. It didn't record any conversations. It was a complete and utter failure. The cat did what cats do. It acted on instinct. It wasn't interested in spying, it was interested in whatever caught its attention. Or it was scared. This one incident pretty much sealed the fate of Operation Acoustic Kitty. The project managers realized it was simply not practical. You can't control a cat like you can a drone or a human agent. A cat has its own agenda, it doesn't follow orders, its natural behavior was a massive problem. The cost of the project was also a factor. They had poured a lot of money into this. The estimates vary, but it was in the millions of dollars over several years. That was a lot of money for a project that couldn't even get past a simple park test. The project was officially discontinued in 1967. A CIA memo from that time summarized the findings. It basically said that the environmental and control factors made it impossible to use cats for this kind of work. It acknowledged that the training was difficult. It said that the cat's independent nature meant they just couldn't reliably direct it to a specific point of interest. The whole idea, while interesting, was just not going to work. It was a big failure. They learned that some animals, no matter how common or how clever they seem, just aren't cut out for spy work, especially when it involves delicate electronics and precise mission parameters. The cat proved too wild, too independent, too much of its own creature to be a useful spy. The failure of Operation Acoustic Kitty provided some clear lessons for the CIA. First, it showed they were truly willing to try anything. The Cold War created an environment where agencies felt pressure to explore every single possibility, even the ones that seemed far-fetched. This project was a testament to that mindset. It proved they wouldn't shy away from unconventional ideas. They were open to thinking way outside the box, but it also highlighted the very real limits of animal espionage, especially when it comes to small, independent animals like cats. You can put all the technology you want inside an animal, but you can't control its mind. You can't make it follow a specific path. You can't make it stay in one spot for a long time. A cat's basic needs and instincts will always win out over any training or implanted technology. Hunger, curiosity, fear, the desire to explore, or even just the need for a nap are all powerful drivers for a cat. These drivers are not compatible with a precise spy mission. This doesn't mean the CIA gave up on animals entirely. Other animals have been used for different types of missions. Pigeons were used for reconnaissance photography. They could fly over enemy territory and take pictures. Dolphins were trained by the Navy for tasks like finding mines or guarding harbors. These missions were different because they played more to the animal's natural abilities or could be more reliably controlled in their specific environments. A pigeon naturally flies. A dolphin naturally swims and can be trained with sonar. But a cat's natural behavior of wandering and being easily distracted was simply too big an obstacle for a listening mission. The story of Acoustic Kitty didn't stay secret forever. Eventually, details about the project came out. When people heard about it, their reaction was often amusement. It sounded so absurd. A spy cat. It became a kind of quirky footnote in the history of Cold War espionage. It made people chuckle, but it also showed how desperate and imaginative intelligence agencies were during that tense period. They were under immense pressure to gather information. This led them to fund projects that, in hindsight, seem almost comical. What it really boils down to is that sometimes, even with all the money and the clever minds in the world, you just can't fight nature. The project was a classic example of trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The cat was never going to be a reliable spy. The most advanced technology of the 1960s couldn't overcome the simple, independent will of a feline. So, in the end, the lesson from Operation Acoustic Kitty was clear. For some things, you need a human, or you need a machine. But for highly specific, controlled espionage, a cat just won't do. It's a good story, a strange chapter in history. It reminds us that sometimes the best laid plans go wrong because of the simplest things. In this case, a cat's natural inclination to be a cat. It's a tale of ambition meeting reality. And reality, in this instance, came in the form of a curious, easily distracted house cat.